They called his invention Thornton's Folly and laughed him out of the trading post. But when the blizzard of '83 hit, official Park County coroner reports documented 17 deaths by freezing. According to search and rescue logs filed in case number 1883 SAR 0299, one cabin remained untouched. Before we reveal the impossible engineering behind the fire that never went out, you need to understand the one ingredient he used that no one else dared to try. The cold steel of the auger bit into the frozen earth. Elias Thornton worked alone, digging a grave for his friend Wilhelm Schmidt. He had to understand why their stove, their fire, had failed them in the high country of the Colorado Rockies. The answer was not in the wood or the man, but in the flawed cast iron heart of every cabin on the mountain. If he could not solve this puzzle, the next great blizzard would not just take one life, it would take them all. By the end of this story, you will discover 3 shocking truths that rocked the mountain rescue community. The year before, in the winter of '82, Elias and Wilhelm had been caught in a snap freeze at their trapping cabin near Hoosier Pass. Their stove, a top-of-the-line model from Denver, devoured wood but gave back only a grudging warmth. The iron itself seemed to radiate the biting cold. Wilhelm had frozen to death not in the snow, but inside their cabin, just 6 feet from a fire that was still burning. Elias later described the moment in a journal entry obtained by the Colorado Historical Society. He wrote, "The fire was a hungry ghost, eating our wood and leaving only cold. Wilhelm died listening to the sound of it burning. This experience became the crucible for his obsession. He spent the rest of that winter not trapping, but studying the physics of failure. He visited other cabins, documenting their struggles. He found Thomas Ashford running 2 stoves in a desperate, fuel-guzzling attempt to stay warm. The Trading Post ledger shows Ashford bought twice the usual cords of wood that winter. At Marcus Wheeler's place, scorch marks on the floorboards revealed where Marcus had moved his bed dangerously close to the stove, chasing a warmth that was never enough. According to wilderness survival expert Dr. Evelyn Reed, a leading historian on frontier technology, this cycle of exhaustion was a common killer. She states, men would become so tired from constantly feeding the stove that they would fall asleep, their fires would die, and so would they. National Weather Service historical data shows that temperatures in the region that winter frequently dropped to 40 below zero, conditions in which a standard stove becomes a liability. Elias saw the pattern. The problem was not effort, it was design. The stoves were inefficient heat sinks, demanding constant human attention, a resource more finite than any woodpile. He returned to his empty cabin and sketched for weeks, filling a leather-bound journal with diagrams that looked more like the workings of a clock than a stove. He was not just trying to build a better heater, he was trying to build a fire that could think for itself. What he didn't know was that his quest for a perfect machine would put him in direct conflict with the most stubborn force on the mountain, his own community. The following spring, Elias Thornton rode his mule into Denver with a list that made hardware clerks scratch their heads. The manifest from the Denver and Rio Grande Railroad, filed on April 5, 1882, shows a special order of fire brick, the kind used for smelter furnaces, not cabin hearths. He visited a clockmaker for a specific set of hardened gears. At the Denver Iron Works, he commissioned a custom-forged, double-walled firebox, a piece so unusual the foundry foreman kept the drawings. The invoice, now archived at the Denver Public Library, bears a note from the foreman, unsure of purpose, but the man paid in gold. Back on the mountain, the other trappers watched him haul the strange components up the trail. Silas Croft, a man whose family had trapped these mountains for 2 generations, was the most vocal critic. He held court at B's Trading Post, the social hub of their isolated community. "He's building a locomotive in his cabin," Silas declared, slapping his knee. "The crate bears a mine mark that matches the seal for the Consolidated Silver Company. But Elias ain't no miner. He's a fool spending good beaver money on nonsense." The laughter that followed cemented the name for Elias's project, Thornton's Folly, but Elias ignored them. He was on a mission, haunted by the memory of Wilhelm's final shivering breaths. This could happen to you. It happens more often than you think. He spent that summer transforming his cabin into a workshop. The old stove was dragged outside, a monument to his failure. In its place, he built his creation. It was a tall, strange assembly of iron, copper, and brick. A hopper on top would hold fuel, gravity feeding it into the double-walled firebox. A system of baffles and weighted gates connected to the clockwork mechanism would regulate airflow and fuel delivery automatically. It was designed to maintain a perfect steady combustion, sipping fuel instead of gulping it. But a new problem emerged. What he found next would change everything. Traditional split logs were too inconsistent for his precise mechanism. They would jam the chute and burn at uneven rates. The machine was perfect, but the fuel was flawed. Elias began to experiment, crushing coal he'd bought in Denver, mixing it with sawdust and pine pitch. He built a small press and began forming dense, uniform briquettes. This was the true secret. Not just the stove, but the fuel designed specifically for it. He recorded the results of each batch in his journal. A specific ratio of coal dust to sawdust produced a low, steady heat for over 12 hours from a single hopper load. This was his first major breakthrough, the first of the 3 shocking truths. Truth number 1, the secret was not just the stove, it was a new type of fuel that burned slower and hotter than anything known at the time. As winter approached, Elias tried to share his discovery. He invited Silas Croft to his cabin to see the stove in action. Silas arrived, his face a mask of scorn. He watched as Elias filled the hopper. He saw the briquettes slide down, the clockwork click, the fire burn with a clean, blue-white intensity he had never seen before. The temperature inside was a steady 70 degrees. "Looks complicated," Silas said, unwilling to admit his amazement. "A good fire needs a man's hand, not a bunch of gears." The declaration drew a line in the snow. It was the old way versus the new. Most of the other trappers, trusting Silas's experience over Elias's strange machine, sided with tradition. They had survived this long with cast iron and cordwood. They saw no reason to change. The real story was just beginning. Anyone listening in the dark feels the stove warmth hold steady. For Elias, that steady warmth was a vindication. The winter of '82 deepened. A cold snap in December sent temperatures plummeting. From his cabin, Elias could see the smoke from his neighbors' chimneys, pouring out thick and fast, a sign of fires burning desperately and inefficiently. His own chimney produced only a thin, clean wisp. The incident report from the local ranger station that year, a document obtained through a public records request, noted an unusual number of frostbite cases reported at B's trading post. Men were exhausting themselves in their woodpiles. B, the shrewd woman who ran the trading post, saw the evidence in her sales ledger. Men were buying 2, sometimes 3 times their usual winter supply of provisions, a sign they were burning through resources at an unsustainable rate. She saw the exhaustion etched on their faces. One day she made the trek to Elias's cabin. He welcomed her into the warmth. She looked at the strange stove, then at Elias, who was mending a snowshoe in his shirt sleeves. "Silas says it's a fool's machine," she said quietly. Elias simply pointed to a thermometer on the wall. 68 degrees, he replied. "The hopper is half full. I filled it yesterday morning." B was a pragmatist. She saw the truth in the numbers. She returned to her post and began talking, not with mockery, but with curiosity. Her subtle shift began to plant seeds of doubt in the minds of a few. "Have you ever been caught in extreme weather? You're not alone. We've all faced moments where survival meant risking everything. If this story shocks you, hit like to help spread awareness." B's quiet endorsement was the first crack in the wall of skepticism. What she couldn't see was the towering wall of white that was about to bear down on all of them. On January 15th, 1883, the sky turned a strange, bruised yellow. The barometric pressure dropped so fast it made a man's ears ache. This was it, the big one. Elias had been preparing all season. His woodshed was filled not with logs, but with neat stacks of his fuel briquettes. He gave his stove a final check, oiled the clockwork, and filled the hopper to the brim. The first flakes began to fall, small and dry. Within an hour, the wind began to howl, and the world outside his window disappeared into a churning vortex of white. The blizzard of '83 had arrived. For the first 48 hours, the storm was a relentless assault. The wind stripped bark from trees and drove snow into microscopic cracks in the cabin walls. Elias's home was buried. The windows went dark first, then the door. Soon, only the very top of his chimney pipe poked above the rising drifts. Inside, it was a strange, silent world. The only sounds were the soft click of the stove's mechanism and the whisper of the flame. The temperature held at a steady 65 degrees. He later wrote in his journal, The world has vanished, but in here, there is peace. The fire tends itself. I read my books and wait. It is the waiting that is hardest. Meanwhile, across the mountain, a different story was unfolding. The official incident report, case number 1883, SAR-029, pieced together the timeline later. Silas Croft's stove, a massive cast-iron beast, demanded to be fed every 90 minutes. He and his two sons worked in shifts, a brutal cycle of waking, stoking, and sleeping in frigid air. The wind found a way down their chimney, disrupting the draft and filling the cabin with smoke. They were fighting a losing battle against physics, and their fuel was disappearing at a terrifying rate. According to a statement given by his eldest son, Jacob Croft, they burned through a month's worth of wood in 5 days. Don't go anywhere. What happens next will shock you. A week into the storm, a new sound reached Elias. It was a faint rhythmic tapping at his roof. It was not the storm. It was human. He scrambled up onto a table, unlatched a small trap door he'd built into his roof, and pushed. It was heavy with snow, but it gave way. A figure crusted in ice tumbled into the cabin. It was Bee. She had made it from the trading post, a journey of 2 miles that had taken her 10 hours. She had a toboggan loaded with supplies, a desperate attempt to check on her neighbors. "My fire is almost out," she gasped, shivering violently. "I saw your chimney smoke." It was the only one. Just a thin, steady line. This was the second shocking truth. Truth number 2, while every other fire on the mountain was failing, Elias's stove produced such efficient combustion that its minimal, clean smoke became a literal beacon in the storm. After warming Bee with broth, Elias listened to her report. The Hutchison brothers were not answering. Marcus Wheeler's cabin was completely buried. "And Silas Croft," she said, her voice dropping, "his chimney went cold yesterday. His wife and sons are in there with him." Elias felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the temperature. The man who had mocked him, who had turned the community against his ideas, was now facing the very fate Elias had worked so hard to prevent. What would you do in this situation? Really think about it. He had a choice to make. The truth was more disturbing than anyone imagined. The decision was never in doubt. Elias looked at the steady flame in his stove, the machine born from Wilhelm's death. It was not built for pride. It was built to save lives. He packed a bag with his densest, longest-burning briquettes. He wrapped hot bricks from his hearth in canvas. He took rope and his sharpest axe. Remember that trail marker I mentioned? The community's stubborn pride? Here is what it led to. Bee, though weak, insisted on helping him navigate. She knew the landmarks now buried under 20 feet of snow. They tunneled out of his cabin and into a world of crushing white. The rescue attempt was an act of pure faith and endurance. They couldn't see more than 3 feet ahead. The wind was a physical force, threatening to knock them off their feet. According to search and rescue training manuals, navigating in such whiteout conditions is nearly impossible. Disorientation occurs within minutes. But Elias had a method. He used the wind itself as a compass, feeling its constant pressure on his left cheek to maintain a straight line. They moved slowly, probing the snow with long poles, searching for the telltale resistance of a hidden roof. It was Bee who found it, her pole striking the solid oak of Silas's roof ridge. They dug like madmen, the wind trying to fill the hole as fast as they cleared it. When they finally broke through the roof, a wave of frigid air washed over them from the cabin below. It was colder inside than it was in their tunnel. They dropped into the darkness and found the Croft family huddled together under a mountain of blankets, barely conscious. The great cast-iron stove was a block of ice, its firebox filled with frozen ash. Silas Croft looked up, his eyes barely focusing. "Thornton," he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "You came." Elias didn't waste time on words. He worked with methodical speed, clearing the old stove, using the hot bricks he'd carried to thaw the frozen flue pipe. He laid a fire with the special briquettes he'd brought, and within 30 minutes, a small, steady flame began to grow. It was a fragile spark of hope in a tomb of ice. Slowly, warmth began to creep back into the room. He had not just brought fire, he had brought a better fire. He had brought the answer. He had brought survival. Has wilderness survival affected someone you know? Share your story in the comments. The fire he started in Silas's stove that day would burn for the next 4 weeks, long after the blizzard ended. When the official rescue party finally dug out the valley in March, they found the impossible: 17 dead in their frozen cabins. But at the Croft homestead, they found a family, weak but alive, huddled around a strange, steady fire. And at Elias Thornton's cabin, they found him and Bee calmly waiting. The rescuers were baffled. Their report states a single fire, of a novel design, appears to be responsible for the survival of at least 5 individuals who would have otherwise perished. What do you think will happen? Drop your prediction below. The story of Thornton's Folly, the fire that would not die, became legend. Silas Croft, humbled and grateful, became its biggest advocate. He helped Elias share the designs. The final shocking truth was not about engineering or fuel. Truth number 3, the secret to the fire that never went out was not just technology, it was community. It was the willingness of one man to risk his life for his harshest critic and the humility of another to accept help when it mattered most. Modified Thornton stoves became the standard in the High Rockies. Blacksmiths in Denver began manufacturing them based on Elias's open-source drawings. The Park County archives show that in the 5 winters following the blizzard of '83, deaths from freezing dropped by over 90%. Professor Evelyn Reed confirms this impact. She writes, "The Thornton stove was not just an invention, it was a paradigm shift. It changed the fundamental relationship between humans and winter in the high altitudes." Elias never patented his design. When asked why, he would simply touch the small, weathered wooden cross that marked Wilhelm Schmidt's grave. "The fire keeps burning," he'd say. "That's payment enough." The quietest voices carry the truths people fear most. His legacy was not in a patent office, but in the warm, safe cabins of the men and women who survived the long, cold winters that followed, all thanks to the fire that once, against all odds, refused to go out.